Hello, I'm Annette Kirkland, and welcome to Beyond the Gates. In this season, we are talking about leading with innovation. This season, we are showcasing the visionary leaders and innovators at ERDC who are pushing boundaries and delivering groundbreaking advancements that create real-world impact. The episode today is titled Snow, Ice, and Sensors, CRREL's Role in Arctic Defense. I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Adrian Doran. He's a research physical scientist, and Dr. Aaron Meyer, research physicist with the ERDC Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory, otherwise known as CRREL. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Annette.
How are y'all this morning?
Doing well.
We're okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about, before we started, we're dealing with pollen here, and I understand you guys are dealing with snow where you are.
Well, at my house in Vermont, when I woke up yesterday, it was 24 and snowing.
Oh, man. We can only imagine here in the deep south. So so we're going to go ahead and start off with Dr. Doran. Can you tell me about yourself and your background and your roles at ERDC, and your role at ERDC?
Yes. Adrian Doran. I grew up in Massachusetts. Got my undergrad from Dartmouth College. I worked in the oil industry for a while. I went back to school to get my PhD in geophysics. And much of my career has been working with seismology, which is the study of energy moving through the earth, and acoustics, which is the study of energy moving through the air. I worked for a number of years at a Navy research lab and have recently moved, or within maybe the past year and a half, moved to ERDC CRREL. And the focus on cold regions is somewhat new to me, although many of the techniques and analyses we do is I've been working on for a long time. And it's a great place to work.
Perfect. Dr. Meyer?
I'm Dr. Aaron Meyer. I have a PhD in physics from the University of Rhode Island. I was born and raised in Rhode Island and moved to New Hampshire and got a job at CRREL a little more than 6 years ago now. I studied soft condensed matter as part of my PhD, but since then I've pivoted to kind of the role, the specialty of the branch here, which has to do with signal processing, signal analyses. So I've taken a liking and gained some expertise in those kind of problems about source localization, propagation, those kind of things. And the experiment that we did recently in the Arctic was the first time I've been that far north. Previously, I've only been to Fairbanks, Alaska, but we went well into the Arctic Circle, and that was quite an experience, and kind of reinforced for me why I do this job and why I like it so much.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to jump right into the subject matter. Today, we're going to talk about a really cool exercise/research, and of course, no pun intended, as you start by telling us about what and I'm going to say this, I hope right, Nanook is and how CRREL was involved.
Sure, I can start. Operation Nanook is a yearly Canadian exercise, military exercise, and CRREL has been involved because Major Matt Hefner, who was on a detail at CRREL, was part of this. So it's Canadian-led, but it's a multinational exercise, and Major Hefner, an American, led a small contingent dedicated to science and technology testing and evaluation of technologies in the Arctic. And this was all made possible by a recent agreement that has been signed by 7 Arctic nations. I forget exactly which ones, but it's United States, Canada, a few of the Scandinavian countries, which makes collaboration between our nations much easier, so we can share resources, we can share data, and in this case, we can record activities of other nations. And so CRREL has been involved because, like I said, Major Hefner has been leading this science and technology-focused portion of it. And it draws on years of experience and expertise that CRREL has been operating and contributing to operations in the Arctic.
Okay. Dr. Meyer, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Adrian covered it quite well there. And I guess I'll just add that I think our plan in the future is to participate in next year's Nanook and stay in that realm. And it's a great opportunity to put all our theories and our technology to the test up there. It's great to have facilities and people here who can test them locally, but they're really meant to succeed up there in the Arctic environment. So it's really a one-of-a-kind opportunity to go up there and see where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Right, right. Okay, so the Arctic is one of the harshest environments on Earth. What are some of the biggest challenges we face when it comes to deploying surveillance technology there?
So I think you can imagine some of the challenges that typically come up. It's very remote, so it's tough to get resupplied. Instrumentation is few and far between. Even things like satellites have fewer orbits around the Arctic. So our baseline understanding of the what we call the domain is somewhat limited to begin with. And then, when you operate a piece of local surveillance technology, which is what we were doing, and we can talk about more later, but you need all the typical requirements of energy, power, and those are really tough to get. And our system, we believe, works well because it utilizes fiber optic cables, and in our sense, you can surveil a wide area with very limited power and resources. And I think I'll actually let Aaron speak to this because he's been working on this problem for a long time.
Okay.
What Adrian said is correct. When it's so cold up there, anything with the battery, for instance, if you were to just deploy a microphone as you would, or a geophone, anything like that, the cold will just rob the battery of all its energy. So very quickly. And so a major advantage to the DOS technology, which I think we're going to talk about later, so I won't get too far into it, is that it kind of overcomes that challenge. But it being so cold, it makes deploying sensors up there extremely difficult, and having them be reliable after any amount of time, very difficult too. And there's other very unique effects in the Arctic. For instance, the aurora borealis, the plasma in the atmosphere, can interfere with communications. That's an open problem that we are trying to look at and learn more about. And that's just one example, for instance.
Okay.
So, very difficult place for sensors.
So, during your demonstration there, how did the Arctic environment affect sensor performance, and what did you learn about how different targets interact with the sensors?
So I guess I'll take this opportunity to really describe more in detail what we were doing,
Okay.
And the technology we're using and the types of activity we were monitoring, and then maybe Aaron can speak to how the environment, impacted those things. So basically what we were doing is at the beginning of this off Nanook, there was a period of maybe a week where the soldiers were acclimatizing, getting used to operating and living in minus 30 degrees Celsius. And during much of this, there was things like vehicle testing, other kinds of testing happening, and we were positioned along an ice road. So between the town of Inuvik, which is where we were staying, and the town of Aklavik, both in the Northwest Territories, there's a branch of the Mackenzie River that freezes and is used as a road for, I don't know how long, but many months. And in fact, it's the only way to get between those two cities if you're using a car, is to wait for the winter and drive. So what we were doing is we have this fiber optic system called a distributed acoustic sensor. There's other kinds of fiber optic systems, but this is the one we were using. And you lay out a fiber optic cable. This can be sort of arbitrary length. Ours was about 1 kilometer, but it could be tens or more of kilometers. And we hook up something called an interrogator to the end. And this is basically an instrumentation box that sends light down the fiber optic cable, which then returns and allows you to measure vibrations that are occurring along the cable. And basically, if there's an impact that will cause a vibration, something as small as a footstep, if it's close enough, or something like a vehicle or an aircraft, it will induce vibrations in the cable, and you can detect those and, in a sense, localize them because it's going to light up some portion of the cable. possibly, in theory, closest to the target, but we have found that that's not always the case, but that's a separate discussion. So what we're doing is monitoring a number of different vehicles at a number of different speeds move up and down the ice road. And in addition to that, we deployed the cable in a number of different conditions. So within, we in one case, we put the cable directly on the snow. There was about 20 inches of snow on top of the ice road. In one case, we dug out the snow and put the cable on top of the ice. In another case, we dug out the snow and carved into the ice with a chainsaw and then put the cable in and refroze it with fresh water. And all the while this was happening, the temperatures were, like I said, ranging from about minus 30 to minus 35.
Man.
And what we're trying to do is several different things. One is quantify how well the sensor works in the Arctic. So we know these kind of systems work in general, but we want to see what changes occur when you're operating at those conditions and when targets are moving around in that environment. And second, we wanted to learn we wanted to demonstrate that you can use the system along with knowledge of the target to interrogate the Earth. And in this case, we mean the ice and snow.
Right.
So the signals do depend on the medium they're propagating through. So whether it's the ice road, whether it's the snow, and it's really, we're trying to do those two things simultaneously: monitor human activity and also sample the environment.
Okay.
And I can let Aaron speak to what we learned about that.
Okay.
Adrian put it very eloquently, but once the cable's in a medium, let's call it could be in snow, or it could be in ice, how the cable responds and what signal we end up recording depends on that medium. So you can kind of break these problems down into three different ingredients. One would be the source, like what's creating the sound or the vibrations. That could be a truck, could be a plane, could be a drone. And you want to characterize that source signal. But then the next ingredient is the environment itself. So once that source emits its signal, that signal has to travel, and those propagating waves can attenuate in the environment, and they can scatter in the environment. Eventually, they do arrive, hopefully, at your sensor, and that's the third ingredient, how your sensor is behaving in the environment. So what we end up measuring is a culmination of those three things. And what we end up finding is that for the same source, because we can control that during our testing, and for the same sensor in a different environment, say snow or ice, you get a different signal out. So we can learn a lot about the environment itself by looking at the signals that we end up recording, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, and then the next question, I guess, is just kind of intertwined with that. It said, I understand that analyzing signals helps you do more than just detect activity. It helps you better understand the environment itself. And then again, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we have a specific sensor out there. First, for any number of our tests, we have a specific vehicle that we know, how it's being operated, where it's going, and we can use those two pieces of information to interrogate the environment. So, for example, a signal comes in, and we detect it on several different lines of this cable. We think at the moment we can tell the difference between, okay, this one is in ice, this one is in the snow, and there's the one that was just on top of the ice. We're having some ambiguity, but we're trying to figure out exactly how much you can say.
Right.
So, to support that, this is sort of a follow-on thing we haven't really looked at, but one thing we did while we were up there is we dug what are called snow pits. So basically you dig through the snow and you take measurements of a few different properties: temperature, weight, so the density really, as a function of depth in the snow. And there's some kind of amazing things we found while doing that. One is that the top of the snow was about the air temperature. So on this we did this on the coldest day, so it was minus 37 at the top, and then over about 18 to 20 inches, it got down to or really up to 32 degrees, so freezing. So right at the interface between the river and the snow
Right.
is just about freezing. So that means there's a gradient there of about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, or actually more, that is really supported on a very short length scale.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing we're trying to do, and I'm not sure if we have enough data yet to really dig into this, but is to use that to inform how well the sensor is going to work in these different conditions. Because if you're familiar with snow, there's not just one type of snow. There's dry snow, there's wet snow, there's cold snow, there's warm snow. And so all of these things will play a role in how you interpret the signals that you're seeing. And that's really what we're trying to get at the heart of is what exactly can you say? And I'll say that, I'll also add that we're talking about snow and ice here today because that's what we were doing. I should probably specify that we were there in February, so it was cold. And it was about we were about 50 or maybe 100 miles from the Arctic Ocean in Canada.
Wow.
And I'll also add that, okay, what I was going to say is we're working on ice and snow, but one other challenge we haven't really talked about with the Arctic is that in the summer, it's a totally different place. So even if you're not working with ice and snow, the environment it really swings, and it can be like basically a swamp in some cases.
I was fixing to ask, how is that swing?
Well, I mean, I guess personally, I don't really know. We got to go back in the summer and see how it works.
Okay.
But anyway, those are the kind of things in the environment. There's a few other things. Yeah. Anyway, I'll let Aaron take it from there.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add to that last point is that you could imagine a sensor or cable out there deployed and basically being permanent, and it would experience the changes of the seasons. And all the while it's listening to sources in the environment. It could be wildlife, it could be bush planes flying overhead, any kind of thing that can create a vibration. And if the cable's in the ground and that ground's frozen solid versus it's the springtime and the whole ground is muddy or it's covered in vegetation, all those things are going to have really strong effects on the signal we measure. So it gets back to basically monitoring of the environment. I think with long enough observation time, you could say with a high degree of confidence what's going on in the environment right now. The cable's inundated with water, and we know that because this is what our signal looks like. So
right.
It's as much monitoring the environment as it is sources, and those two actually inform each other. If we can characterize one really well, we can say a lot about the other, and vice versa.
Right. So again, you're talking about what kind of things.
And if I can just add one thing. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to add, while we were there, we did see some crazy things in the environment. So, like, for example, we were digging out the snow on the ice road, and under the ice road, we, based on some calculations that we saw from the government of Canada, the ice road was about like 80 inches of ice thick. Mm-hmm. We know that around the ice road, if you go directly off of where the route was, I mean, it doesn't take up the whole river. So there's like the middle, that's the ice road. And if you go off to the side, in some places, the ice was as thin as 6 to 8 inches. Mm-hmm. So that's a huge swing in ice thickness that obviously impacts safety, other things. And then there's one other thing. When we were digging out the snow, we did find there's an area of liquid water, which would seem hard to believe considering it was minus 37 out.
Right.
But these are we want to know if we can quantify these things with this sensor from a very remote, right? So from tens of kilometers away, could we have identified that?
Wow, that's mind blowing. So we get into what kinds of things were you able to detect with the system during the exercise, as you're talking about vehicle types, people, ice, snow, thickness, etc.
So we were focused on vehicles because we had the most control over those.
Right.
So we set up a scenario or a series of scenarios where we had a kind of standard Toyota Tundra driving around. We had a Polaris M-Razor Alpha, which is a sort of winterized, I don't know what to call it, like a souped-up buggy is what I think of it.
Right. Like a
It's a
side-by-side type
military
of thing.
vehicle.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And then we had military snowmobiles, and so these are the things that we really focused on. But in summary, we could see them all operating at all sorts of different speeds. It's just a question of the range you could detect at. But we were able to hear all sorts of other things. So people moving,
right,
aircraft that we couldn't really see, but we know were around. And we haven't spent much time digging into those kind of other, what we would call sources of opportunity. But there's a lot of information in there.
Okay. Dr. Meyer?
There were huskies.
Huskies? The dogs?
Yeah. There was a family of huskies there at the camp nearby, which is our kind of base of operation. So they would come down and run around the cable when we were trying to work. And so we have some husky signatures too.
Okay.
And then basically anything that was going on at that camp nearby, like soldiers moving around, starting and stopping of vehicles, starting and stopping of generators, all of those things create vibrations that this sensor did pick up.
Okay.
And so when we were doing our testing with vehicles, we did our best to try to actually isolate those things because we didn't want them to become all convoluted together. So it kind of speaks to some challenges when you're trying to do some rigorous scientific testing on sources.
Okay.
But in general, the system is very sensitive, and anything that is in the vicinity that could cause sound or vibration through the ground, it can detect. Yeah.
Okay, so then here we go. Were there any
Those
surprises?
huskies were awesome. I was going to say that the huskies were like, Aaron made friends with these huskies, and they were basically just sleeping in the shade in minus 37 on top of snow.
That blows
Just
my
like,
mind.
See them around in like the summer here.
Right.
Good to see them in their natural habitat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like polar bears, I guess. They're equipped as a dog to handle those types of environments. That is just mind-blowing. So we get into were there any surprises when it came to how sound or movement traveled through the snow and ice?
I would say we expected there to be differences. I mean, that's kind of why we're out there doing it. I was surprised by what I described earlier, which was that we found liquid water on top of the river in some places.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised that, I guess not surprised, but I was interested to see that I think there are things we can't really explain yet. Aaron kind of alluded to this earlier, but the scattering of sound in the environment is pretty substantial in these ice roads, and I think it was very difficult to describe that to get to model that accurately,
mm-hmm.
Because of how complicated the environment is. But I was, I guess, just generally pleasantly surprised that it worked very well.
Awesome. That's a good thing.
What we hope.
Right, exactly. Dr. Meyer?
Yeah. So I think I was surprised at how well the surface laid cable operated. So traditionally, what you do with this kind of sensor and cable is you bury it in the ground, not too deep. But an additional facet of our research is how effective is it if you were to just lay it on top of the ground? And we called that exploratory DOS.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we did for 2 of 3 environments. We laid it on top of snowpack and on top of ice, and then the third one was encased in ice. And surprisingly, the on top of snow cable sections were the most acoustically sensitive. And that might be surprising because snow is known as a pretty good sound absorber.
Right.
So that was a pleasant surprise. And the other thing that makes our job as signal analysts is looking at what modalities, whether it be acoustic or seismic, are actually coming to our cable. So what I mean by that is imagine a truck or one of our vehicles traveling down the ice road. what it's doing is it's emitting acoustic waves. The engine noise, for instance, has some harmonics in it.
Right.
But also the tires create a broadband sound, especially if they have like studs on them, like clack against ice, for instance. But it's also transmitting seismic energy into the ice through frictional forces on the bottom of the tire. And we have some evidence that the cables that we deployed into the ice itself had the best performance. And we think that's because it's detecting those fast-moving seismic waves, and the other sections of cable, for instance, on top of the snow, were not. And so we have an interesting problem deciphering which cables and which cable sections are picking up which types of waves.
Right.
And so, because we're laying them right at the interfaces of those two things, so to speak.
Okay.
So there were plenty of little details and surprises in the data set, which I personally enjoy deciphering.
Well, if you're just tuning in,
And I'll add that
okay.
it sounds. I was going to say, I'll add that it can sound perhaps like sort of an academic exercise, but I would say it's really not, because these fiber optic systems are now being used for physical security for all sorts of reasons, and including monitoring aerial targets. And so there is a lot of interest in because these fiber optic cables are everywhere.
Right.
How to really use them. Say you want to track a drone or an airplane or whatever. How you deploy the cable is of great. We know it's of great importance. It makes a big difference.
Right.
So we want to get this. We want to understand more, because these systems are everywhere now and are rapidly proliferating.
Right. What works and what doesn't work. I mean, it's important. So, what makes fiber optic systems such a great fit for harsh environments like the Arctic?
Well, Aaron and I have been talking about this a lot, but I think basically the biggest selling point is that with these fiber optic cables, like we've mentioned earlier, they can extend for tens of kilometers or more. And along the cable, you don't need any energy. So you only need power and perhaps some sort of insulation from vibrations right at the instrumentation box, which is sort of a central node for distributed sensing. And if you string these things together, you can really get very wide aperture sensing. So it's not just the Arctic, it's also really any remote area where you may not have ready access to power or ready access to other resources. And these systems, once deployed, they will sit there until someone moves them or breaks them, they can be out there for a long time. And I think one thing we tried to sort of determine with our testing, even though it was only a couple of days, the cable was down and it had reached the ambient temperature, which was in the minus 30s, within the first, I think, 12 hours maybe. And then for the whole rest of the time, it was just sitting there at minus 30 something and working just fine. Wow. So these systems, A, can sense along a wide area, but B, are somewhat, they're not impervious to the environment, because we know what we're talking about is the environment impacts what they're picking up. But they're impervious to being, they're not easy to degrade. They can be there for a long time.
Dr. Meyer?
Yeah, those are the major pros to the technology in the Arctic. I should add that it can't be jammed, and it can be easily concealed as well. It's normally buried. If the cable were to be damaged somehow, it could still operate, actually, if you were to cut the cable in two. That just means you have a cable that's half the length but still operating. So it's very robust. And I should say that for certain targets, like low altitude threats, we have another project that uses the same technology that tries to use distributed acoustic sensing as an early detection system for those kind of targets. And the reason why it's so advantageous is because when targets are low like that, they're basically avoiding radar. They're hiding in the interference pattern caused by radar. So and we probably all heard about over-the-horizon radar, and the real difficulty it is finding those airborne threats in the Arctic and coming over the horizon. But DOS is uniquely suited to cover that gap. When things are very low to the ground, that's exactly where acoustics and seismic starts to work.
Right.
So there's a lot of advantages to using a distributed acoustic sensor.
Okay. So again, how do systems like distributed acoustic sensing help with early threat detection in places like the Arctic?
I think Aaron should probably answer this one first, but then I can come back with a few other things.
Okay.
I think I just I'm going to repeat myself.
Right. That's okay. So, I realized after you said it, I was like, okay, say it again.
Yeah. That's fine. I'd be happy to. So you have to deploy the cable one time, and that's a one-time investment. But otherwise, it's a low energy, low maintenance. In fact, unless something catastrophic happens to the cable, you can basically to be there in perpetuity. So, like, we've had cables deployed in the ground that we've returned to several years later, and they work just fine. And so that's a real boon in the Arctic, because you don't want to have to visit all the maintenance and logistics of getting there to these remote places, to these harsh environments. If you have a sensor that you've deployed once and deployed it well, then it's going to work for years. So, so it can be a frontline kind of sensor. It can be a cueing that it'll hear something, and it's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to do any kind of defeat of the threat, but it's going to tell you it heard something and place it on the map for you. And it's going to work for things that are traveling on the surface of the Earth or near the surface of the Earth.
Okay.
So,
Dr. Doran, did you have something to add?
And I think this might be a good chance to talk about the difference between active sensors and passive sensors, which is what Aaron was mentioning earlier. But a system like radar is a classic example of an active sensor, where the radar will send a ping out, it'll hit the target, and then it will come back. And from that sequence, the system can tell the direction and an estimate of the range of what they're looking for. And radar is a very powerful technology. Obviously, it's used basically everywhere. But it does have limitations, and one of them is that it requires active energy input. So in addition to requiring the raw energy to do that, it also can be used as the adversary can know that you're doing it because you're sending out energy, and so they can detect it,
right,
and therefore try to avoid it. But a passive sensor is not putting energy out into the environment. It is just listening. So DOS is with its ability to passively monitor wide areas is, we believe really well suited to this Arctic region.
Sounds like it. Well, so this was a joint effort. Can you talk about how the collaboration with others and how the task forces came together?
Yes. So like I said, our small portion of Op Nanook in which we participated was organized by U.S. Army Major Matt Hefner, and how he managed to pull together all of the different things that he was able to do, including participation from other nations, including the to schedule resources like C-130s and C-17s and all the equipment. I have no idea how he was able to do that. You should probably interview him for a whole different show about what that entails. But for our piece, we really made use of this international agreement ICE paper, which I forget the exact acronym, but it's something like International Collaboration of Arctic Partners. That's not it, but something like that.
Well, we live by acronyms around here.
Major, right. And Major Hefner utilized this agreement too in order to pull some of this together. But for us, the main ability is the main thing it enables is the ability to collect data from other nations and then share it with other nations. Without this, we wouldn't have been able to participate because these data could be sensitive or proprietary. Right. But this mechanism really allows us to work with our allies and solve problems jointly.
Right.
And I'll say that I'll add that. So that's what enabled us to participate in the mission. But what enabled us to really pull the thing off at all is I want to speak to the expertise of CRREL. So, the truth is we had somewhat of a shoestring budget for this, considering what we were doing, and without the combined experience and resources of CRREL, we probably wouldn't have been able to pull it off. I once made a list of everybody from the institution who contributed in some way, big or small, and we drew on about 20% of the whole place.
Wow, that's great.
In terms of just the number of people. So I would say that CRREL really is uniquely positioned to execute these kind of things, which are both very targeted. So this is, of course, a very specific thing we're doing, measuring vibrations in ice and snow. But it's also, there's a lot of general expertise needed about how to work in the Arctic, how to do logistics, the instrumentation required. And so I think CRREL really shone in this to pull this off. And, one thing as we move forward, highlighting what we did, I'm going to try to make it clear that we, in my opinion, it couldn't have been done on the same budget at an institution besides CRREL.
Right. Okay. Dr. Meyer, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add that it was, in addition to all of that, a fantastic opportunity to see what other type of Arctic research is going on around the nation and what our partners really care about. So, as an example, the Dr. Fink from MIT was invited there, and he's developing a thermal sensor, which is embedded into clothing. It is the clothing itself, actually. It's the fibers of the clothing, and so the soldiers were wearing them, and we actually put them on at one point when we were deploying our cable and getting some sweat in. Their team was there monitoring us and our vitals.
Okay.
And so that's just one example, and it also sparks collaboration afterwards. So we've made meaningful connections with the mobility team at NRC in Canada, and we're working on future collaborations there. And of all that, it's also a stark reality check. You go there with the war fighters, and you learn exactly what they care about, what's not working for them. And if you bring them a doodad or a piece of technology that you think is great, and they say, "Oh, I'm never going to use this," or "This doesn't work for this reason," and you get surprised almost every time.
Right.
So any opportunity we have to do that, we should take and plan to.
Well, and partnerships and collaboration, it's what makes so much work, and so it's so important in what we do at ERDC. So why is it so important to get this type of real-world testing done now?
I would say that, someone actually asked us this. Basically, CRREL has certain facilities. For example, we have this thing called the Frost Effects Research Facility, which is like kind of the size of a football field and is an indoor track that we can refrigerate down to some temperature below freezing. Why couldn't we just do this testing there? And my response would be that, first of all, yes, we should do that testing there. All of these things should be, as they say, yes and. We do need to do controlled tests in facilities, but we also need to do uncontrolled tests to see what happens. And not for better or worse, for better, our system performed quite well, and we didn't really have any major hiccups, which is shockingly rare in my experience. But the rest of the exercise that Major Hefner was leading and that was occurring in Abdanook, there was a lot of challenges. Things didn't work, things broke, things crashed through the ice. And I guess I'll revise my statement that we had no major challenges. We did have one major challenge, which was there was pretty significant delays. So all the equipment and the personnel that were coming on the exercise were delayed by mechanical problems with airplanes, with a few other things. And personally, we were like a day or two off from calling it because we were just sitting up in this town called Inuvik for a week, and it was really not clear that anything was going to happen. So, in that sense, that's probably a standard feature of working in the Arctic is that your timelines are just really long.
Right.
But that's not something you can prepare for in the lab. You're not going to sit in the that's not something you can prepare for in the lab.
Right.
And so I think any scientist would agree that both need to be done, and there's no substitute for the real world.
Right. Dr. Meyer?
I guess I would just add more of a big picture view of why we need to do real-world testing. I mean, the Arctic is the fastest changing environment on our planet, and whether we want the world power to see that, and they're seeing opportunities. So we want to be prepared for any kind of eventuality, and to be prepared, you have to bring whatever tools you think are viable and test them up there. Really understand if they work well or if they don't. And that kind of stuff needs to happen well before. So I think in large part that's what we were doing up there.
Okay. All right. So we're going to look ahead. How does CRREL plan to build on what you've learned during Op Nanook, and what's next for your team?
I'd say there's a few ways. Some of them are sort of through established channels and some aren't. So I think Aaron already mentioned that there's going to be an Op Nanook 26. And hopefully Major Hefner will be leading another science technology S&T cohort to test and validate and improve technology for the area, and we hope to participate in that. There are U.S.-led Arctic exercises that we are also hoping to or planning to follow up on what we've done. So try different targets, different Arctic regions. Like I said, ice and snow it does not capture the range of ice and snow that exists.
Right.
To say nothing of like permafrost or other Arctic conditions. And as Aaron said, it's all changing all the time rapidly. So all these things still need to be tested for us. But we also, just sort of from a bigger picture, we know these systems work, and so we want to make sure that soldiers, operators, commanders know the power of these systems. So we're trying to shake trees. We're trying to shout it from the mountain.
Right.
These systems work. They work in the cold in ways that other systems don't. We want to work with the Army to see where we go from here.
Right. Dr. Meyer?
Yeah, so I think we identified a number of future applied research opportunities just by going there and doing this experiment. Right. And one of them is kind of the marriage between vehicle mobility in the Arctic and this technology, DAS. We're trying to get this idea off the ground that we can use the DAS to do long duration, long span kind of monitoring of roadways and pathways for vehicle mobility. Those things that the Army certainly cares about, whether you can or cannot safely drive, or whether you're going to get stuck in the mud. We definitely think DAS can be used for that. And in general, we want to be able to deploy one of these sensing cables in the Arctic in a long duration kind of exercise, so we can observe the changing of the seasons, which we alluded to earlier, understand how the statistics of our signals are changing, and just in general mature it in that respect.
Okay.
So we see a lot of opportunities for the technology in this environment.
Okay. Well, here we go. To wrap up, what's the key takeaway you'd like our listeners to have from this valuable conversation?
For me, it's that working in the Arctic is basically two problems. One, you have all the difficulties of the extreme conditions, the lack of resources, the large distances, both in terms of space and time that you're working on. But there's also the original problem, which is not trivial. So, using these fiber optic systems to detect vehicles and activity and aircraft and whatever, that's already complicated. So you're really trying to do two things at once.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've shown that it can work, and we have a lot of room to grow in the Arctic. And Aaron mentioned this, but in a literal and sort of activity sense, it's heating up. So I think it's important that we get a foothold in when we can.
Okay. Dr. Meyer?
Yeah, said, I would add that, or reiterate that the Arctic is relevant again, and the Army has a cold regions lab, and we have a lot of institutional knowledge about that environment and how vehicles and sensors will operate and will fail in that environment. And we're continuing that work with a new sense of purpose now. And so I think DOTS is going to play a role. It's a technology that really is just taking off. It's kind of rare to find that. And, we have tried and true technologies, but DOTS is continuing to evolve like orders of magnitude every few years. So we're very excited to use the technology and test it up there. And we think we're onto something.
Okay. Well, I've been speaking with Dr. Adrian Doran and Dr. Aaron Meyer. They're with the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory. We're talking about snow, ice, and sensors, CRREL's role in Arctic defense. And we've wrapped up, but I have this extra special question because here in the South, and a lot of listeners, they can't even fathom 0 degrees, let alone colder than that. So what's one piece of gear you absolutely could not live without in these extreme conditions there in the Arctic?
So it's kind of funny because of the delays that I mentioned earlier, we had to do a lot of our field work without a lot of our gear.
Right.
So, personally, I didn't have my cold weather boots for most of what we were doing, and I didn't have the parka, and I just had my typical beanie. But we were basically digging snow hard enough and fast enough that being in minus 35, if you keep moving, it didn't actually feel that cold.
I don't believe you.
We were not it felt cold, but it was chilly. But probably the most pampered answer I can give is that every morning we had a hot breakfast. So that was good.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Much needed. Dr. Meyer, you have anything to add?
Yeah, we were well fed. That was a plus. So hand warmers are quite nice.
Right.
They're pretty cheap. Invest in them. It's got to be the boots, I would say. If you don't have a good pair of shoes up there, you're in for a bad time. And also, don't be too far from shelter. Have a vehicle that starts.